and let's start together. As always, I'm increasingly excited for us to meet on these Monday evenings as we really start to forge this sense of Sangha as well. You know, there's like this impression of coming together, coming home, circularity, even if it's online. So I'm so grateful that we're here again together on this Monday evening, and excited that we're pouring a little bit more into the topic that we started last week. And I think for many of you, much of this will be really new and fresh, both in the unraveling that it brings in our own sensuality and our own sexuality, but also in many of the offerings, especially from Ayurveda, but also from Tantra, many of the tools and the techniques and the practices that may be really new for us and exploratory, just really new explorations. So let's arrive and land together for a second. Let's just come to close the eyes and settle in for a moment. And simply coming to sense what it is to be here in this ever-growing feeling of coming into a circle of women, the Sangha, the sacred community. Such importance of this now, at this moment, especially. To feel the gift of our interconnection, the gift of being held and holding. And whatever might come with us from the day, feeling that that's here also, not pushing anything away. And yet at the same time, there being a true availability and openness to whatever it is that intends to come our way this evening. Sometimes in the most unexpected ways. May these gifts of Ayurveda and Tantra really allow an inner flourishing, but that flourishing also of our bodies, our hearts, our minds, our spirits, our ojas. So just feeling almost like there's an enveloping opening happening in the inner realm, open to whatever is here for the next couple hours. Open to the sharing, open to the connecting, and open to the revealing. And as I've invited you before, let's come to chant. So you can repeat after me these two beautiful chants. And if it feels comfortable for you, let the hands settle into the heart space and then repeat after me. Om Sahana Vavatu. Sahana Vonaktu. Saha Viriyam Karavavahe. Tejasvinavaditamastu. Ma Virvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And then the second of the two, just really inviting the energy of Ayurveda, the healing potential of Ayurveda, the wisdom of Ayurveda to deepen into our own swasta, to deepen into our great healthfulness on every level. So as we chant this, we're really just chanting to that inner knowing of complete balance and wholeness and healing. Again, repeating after me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Dhanvantaraye.
Dhanvantaraye.
Amruta Kalahastaya. Sarva Maya Vinashaya. Trailokya Nadaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Namaha. Settle there for 1 or 2 more moments and let your heart connect to your sankalpa, your sacred intention, what it is that brings you here this evening. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It doesn't have to be a goal, but rather just your intention that sits you here. It might be as soft as to meet myself, to show up for something that opens me to be here with other women, whatever's there for you. Enjoying a nice full breath here before coming to open the eyes and just enjoying movement if there's anything that feels good for you. Okay, and I really want to welcome those also who are watching this afterwards. We welcome you also, and we hold you here as well with us. Yeah, some are saying hi. Hi, women, wherever you are around the world that are also joining and watching afterwards. Let's hop into dyads immediately, women, with a moment of sharing just around what I just asked, which was our sankalpa. You know, often sankalpa, or sacred intention, as it is understood in Sanskrit, is misunderstood as though it's some kind of fixed, projected expectation of the mind. You know, like I have this intention to get somewhere. But sacred intention is more like hearing what the heart is speaking in any given moment. So you might have had an intention when you first registered for our time together, but then today you might have felt dragging, or you might have felt really excited, or anywhere in between. But there's probably a very specific calling of the heart that has you here today, now. So let's orient to sharing a little bit about that. You know, just what it is that has us here now, today, what it is that's there for you. Let's give 3 minutes each way. So we'll meet back in 6 minutes, okay? And I'll put you in pairs, and hopefully it'll help you also to have some connection with a new friend, a new woman. Perfect. We've got perfect pairs. If anyone has a challenge, then come on back to the main room if you can, and let me know about it, okay? Okay, I'll see you in six minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. There's the glow. There's the dyad glow. Let's all come off mute for a moment and just share. Leanna was just sharing how that is for you to connect with another woman. Just a moment or two, anything that arises for anyone.
It is absolutely awesome.
I just want to say bye to Megan. We were sort of cut off.
Bye, Nadia. Thank you. Bye. That was the fastest 3 minutes. Just like zoomed by. We need an hour next time.
Yes, right? It's so true. You know, in the third level, the way we developed it is we do a lot of dyad work, actually, but we actually present some questions together. And the women continuously say to me, wow, the enriching nature of this, you know, meeting again and again with some of these really, you know, invoking questions, revealing questions. And so sometimes we would literally give 20, 30 minutes, you know, to be together with one other woman. And it's so powerful. So that's why I was saying to all of you also to meet up, you know, meet up in the best ways you can. If it feels matching. Yes.
I have a question for you. So me and Christy got to talking about microdosing, because I was just telling her it's a huge game changer for me. What is the Ayurvedic standpoint on microdosing mushrooms?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, we can really only speak to what Ayurveda now might say about it, because classically, Carrie, so those of you who aren't aware of what Carrie's talking about, she's talking about small dosages of medicinal or magic mushrooms. And there's various what we could call microdosing that people are experimenting more and more and using more and more now. And especially with psychedelics and psychotropics as well. So with let's just say with marijuana and mushrooms, as far as in the Ayurvedic context, the only thing that's really spelled out in any of the Dravya Guna, so any of the herbal medicine, is smaller usages that I've ever been introduced to. So I'm also humble to that. is smaller dosages of what we call bang. Have any of you heard of bang before? Any of you have been to India and heard of it before? BANG, which is basically what is often liked to as hash, or sometimes even shake, like the shake of the, the leftover leaves of marijuana. And then what's often done with that is then it's put into mead, and mead is like a fermented honey, right? So like an alcoholized honey. And so almost like a homeopathic dosage, that's then taken and mixed with a formula of other herbs, then pressed into a pill, or pressed also into some things that might be taken like a liquid as well. We have different types. And so you get this very small micro dosage, basically, of something that's been put into basically like a tincture. And there are certain formulas that are used in that way to help, especially to calm the nervous system as nervine tonics, kind of like how CBD is being used today. So that's one of the main ways that we see it. But as far as microdosing mushrooms, now in Ayurveda, it being a presence medicine, what that means is, and for those of you who are more and more interested in this, I really suggest coming to the 50-hour course, because we go so much more into this, specifically. But as in it being a presence medicine, it means, how does that thing affect that being now? So that specific being in this specific situation or environment and now. So we can never give a generalized viewpoint on microdosing is like this or like this. It's good, it's bad, it's right, it's wrong. Actually, very clearly, Charaka, one of the great seers of Ayurveda, said very, very cleanly and clearly, anything can be medicine for anyone, for the right person at the right time. Let's say it in that way. But anything can also be poison for the wrong person at the wrong time. So in that way, actually, many different things are used as medicine. This is medicine according to Ayurveda. These rings that I wear, so all three of these rings are specific metals with specific stones. So most of you can recognize that's pearl with gold. This is white sapphire with gold, and this is emerald with silver. These metals with these stones on specific fingers are actually medicinal, according to Jyotish, Vedic astrology, and also according to Ayurveda. But for the wrong person on the wrong finger, totally different effect. So these are prescribed knowing one's chart, for example. But also in Ayurveda, we even have methods in which we can ingest stones. Like there is a way of bringing emerald to ash and then ingesting it. Mercury is actually taken in Ayurveda. We don't sell anything with mercury in it in Rasa Ayurveda because it's illegal. But in classical Ayurveda, they do take mercury in a homeopathic dosage. Diamond, for example, gold is also used quite often when babies are first born, actually, to light up the brain. This is the idea. So in that way, I guess I introduced that from Carrie's question, because some of these things might seem fringe, or we can't necessarily say that that was found in the origins of Ayurveda, but Ayurveda has some really interesting ways in which it applies things. And in that understanding, microdosing for the right person at the right time might actually be something that can be helpful. For others, it might actually create an imbalance. So we always have to see the conditions and the context. Does that help at all, Carrie, when I say that?
Oh, for sure. Like I'm in the cannabis space
Yes.
professionally.
Yes.
And yeah, I can't even smoke weed because it just doesn't agree with me.
Yes.
But there's different cannabinoids, and CBD, CBN, all of these different types have different benefits, right? It just depends on the person.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does absolutely make sense. So in that way also, when we're self-prescribing, I'm often, sharing with people that we need to just be in touch with what our balance or imbalance is of our doshas. Because, for example, someone with a very strong vata imbalance, using marijuana for a long term can actually increase vata imbalance in the mind, especially. It can increase anxiety, it can increase nervousness, worry, paranoia. So it depends on the structure and the constitution. And this is why, sometimes it concerns me when these things become totally legalized and sort of promoted from there, because let's just say it's less about legalization. It's more about the fact that we have very little education into plant medicine, and our ancestors haven't allowed for, or we haven't had an ancestry that's allowed for the continuity of that wisdom, right? So Ayurveda returns us to that wisdom in many, many ways. And Yeah, this is a beautiful question. We were recently at Rasa, approached by a CBD company to team up and apply Ayurveda to CBD. And I was feeling, a little bit, because there's so little research around this, a little bit of trepidation. And then as the flow of life has it, the person 3 times missed our meeting. And we said, okay, 3 times a charm, never mind. So it's interesting to me to see how these things take care of themselves until there's more research also for us to know how to bring those things together and apply them. But clinically, I've applied Prasham before, which is this one formula that I've used before with individuals with high anxiety that has a little bit of bang in it. And I've seen amazing effects. So it does, it has its place. Okay. Any other questions or anything you want to share? That came from our dyads. Anything else anyone wants to share after your dyad time? Anything else that's there for anyone? You still able to hear me well? Are we still flowing well? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so let's hop then into continuing our topic from last week, which is a literal juicy one in many ways. And we start right with that slide saying yoni, really talking about diving into that which is our yoni. And as I mentioned last week, the yoni is both understood as the feminine holding container of all of life, the great womb of life, the dance of nature and creation. That's the great yoni. The great space from which all emerges, actually, we could say in many ways as well, the great birthplace. And then this is also found within our own microcosm, that each one of us as women, we have this great portal, which we might call the sacred womb or the cradle of life, the container of the great feminine force, the great container also of our creative force, our manifestation force. And also this place, as I mentioned last week, that holds ojas. And we're going to talk more about that today. But just to remind you, ojas is really our vital force, this vigor, our vitality. And that ojas, that vitality, is that which really, we could say, animates everything from our physical health to our emotional and mental health, our energetic health. And the more ojas we have, the more resplendent we are with ojas. We're full with this creative vigor, but we're full with this vitality. The more we feel full in our lives as well. Like the more we also feel resilient and immune and content. A certain confidence comes with ojas. The more we feel the capacity to manifest as well. It's like it gives us the right to birth forth. So ojas really, for us as women in Tantra and Ayurveda, being held especially within the yoni, but we're going to talk, there's 2 seats actually of ojas. One of them is within the yoni. There's so much to be discovered as far as yoni yoga, as far as the yoga and the freedom that can happen by connecting with our yonis, by really opening this area, because it also opens us into our ojas. It also allows that ojas, which provides longevity, also youthfulness. It really starts to allow that space to be filled with its own life force, if we can say it in that way. And so as I was mentioning last week, yoni yoga, as we might call it, is like all yogas, it's a recognition of our unity, which is an interesting one. It's almost like we start to have a recognition of our, this individual yoni sphere of not just the vagina, but the whole womb that lives within us as women, as actually a direct connection to all of life, to nature herself. Yoga meaning union. It's almost like I notice when women start to unfold into their own femininity, when their yoni becomes, I can literally use the word, and it might sound kind of new agey or cliche, but when the yoni becomes like free or liberated, when there's more moksha, more liberation in this whole area, and I don't just mean vaginally, but also the energetics of our wombs as well. When that area becomes more freed, what we start to notice is that there is a sense of direct connection with all of nature, that we start to really recognize that we're not separate. And as I was mentioning last week also, it also opens us to the recognition that both Kama and Ananda are our essence and are our birthright. So Kama, pleasure, that pleasure isn't something to be deviated away from or something to demonize or something that's taboo, but right pleasure, actually, as it's understood in the Vedic tradition. So just the joy of being alive, and even sexual and sensual pleasure that emanates from the yoni, is something that has so much to show us and to liberate within us, so much within us. And there's a lot of ideas about what this means. You know, the idea that that has to mean some kind of, you know, sexuality with a specific partner, but it can also have to do more with the fact that this area of our being feels free, untethered, that as women, it feels really, again, to use that word, resplendent. It feels full with life, and not just life to procreate children, although that's beautiful as well, but it just feels like, you know, the seat of Ojas, the seat of our vitality, is really whole and at peace and residing and ready to use and to pour forth. And so in that way, kama, or pleasure, can arise in many ways. And it can be sexual or sensual pleasure, but it can also be the simple pleasure of being alive. Like that, as we become more open to our own great womb within, to our own cosmic mothering within, we could say, our own cosmic nature within us, something happens and in which we become sensually alive to all of life. And that's what I was saying last week when I was speaking also about the great love making, you know, and Tantra speaks to this, that the greatest understanding of Tantra is when we come to really recognize that we're not separate from anything, that all is making love, that really all of life is in this interplay of drawing together and this dance of being together. So similarly, when we start to free and bring practices that help to free this space, that sort of pleasure of being in life, that juice of being in life, rather than being dried to that, it starts to get reinvigorated. And similarly, Ananda, as the word is understood as true bliss, like as a gentle, all-pervading joy, this true bliss of the soul can even arise from this. And so in that way, I was mentioning last week, and then we're going to start to come into some new things for this evening, that yoni yoga, or this exploration, this freedom of the yoni, of the great womb within, is really its intention, like all yoga, is for freedom. So freedom of that pleasure, freedom of our health, freedom during our life cycles. And those are the main three ways I would say as women we can recognize. So when we start to do these practices that allow for an opening of the space of our yonis, then we start to notice that that pleasure starts to reveal itself, whether that's orgasmic pleasure, for example, or that pleasure is just the feeling of being in the orgasm of life. I'm going to say it really bluntly in that way, like feeling that life is really alive. You know, today I was taking, and I'm not trying to say this, you know, to rub it in, but I was taking a walk on this beautiful beach here in Mexico, and the pelicans were flying up above me. And just the sense of the sand, which was a little bit more granular on my feet, and the gentle whispering of the wind through the trees. It had a very specific sound, and all of the things at once, and of course the water, and all of it together at once. It was like the experience of great heightened pleasure to be in the orgasm of life. But much of the time, because we spend so much in the clouding and the story making of the mind, we don't experience what's here now, what's truly here now. So part of the freedom that happens when we start to invigorate this space of the great feminine within us is we start to recognize the great feminine around us also. We start to recognize, wow. And even if that was, you're taking a walk in the crisp snow today, and you know, the sense of stillness and silence that happens with that, and even the frigidity of the coldness, and feeling that, and feeling also, you know, the slight icicles on the branches of the trees, and the quiet, the unbelievable quiet that comes in the winter. You know, being able to really taste that brings a certain pleasure to our lives. And the more we start to open to our own feminine pole, as far as we consider it, this yoni within us, the more we start to notice that savoring of life, that pleasuring of life, becomes rejuvenated. We could say it in that way. Secondly, for our health, when we start to open and liberate this space, it's not just about the health of the reproductive or the sexual system. And I want to highlight this. Maybe I just say the same thing again. It's not just about the health of your sexual and reproductive system. When the yoni becomes more free, I literally notice that women, and this can be very clearly seen, start to radiate more. Their immunity starts to increase. They start to have more joy and contentment in their lives. They start to notice also that even karmically, things move through their lives much more quickly. Patterns or these, as we spoke of before, cagings and complexes start to become dispersed much more quickly. And just generally, we start to notice that our health, the health promoting effects, even hormonally, of what can happen when the yoni is more open and invigorated, are well known. Even the effects, for example, of oxytocin. So yes, there can be, a lot that happens sexually and reproductively, but more than that, really, when this ojas, when this vitality is freed there, it starts to spread out through the whole body. When I lived in a tantric community for about 10 years, I remember one of the most exciting things was when I would see a new woman who would come, for example, to the community. And when I say tantric community, there's a lot of ideas. Most of the day was spent in deep sadhana, so meditation and yoga, just so you're all really clear. A lot of us had monogamous partners. Other people also explored sexually. There was a lot of teachings as well, which I'm sharing with you. So that was part of it. But a lot of people were in deep practice, deep sadhana. And what would be very exciting was to see, especially for myself, to see other women coming and starting with the practice. And the practice, including maybe also new invigorated practices for herself and her own sensual and sexual health, but also her yoni, but also maybe practices with her partner as well. It was so clear within a couple months how different many women would start to look, how they would come with various health challenges. Whether, I remember one woman who came with, this is just one example, who came with an ovarian cyst, which had grown to about 10 inches. It was huge within her system. And she really didn't want to have surgery. And she started to work with various practices, many of what I'm sharing with you tonight. And 6 months later, when she went back to her doctor, it had shrunk to 2. These kinds of things, most doctors will say, I don't know what you did. I don't really know how this is possible, actually. And then later she decided to just continue on, and it eventually completely basically dissolved, evaporated. She never had to have surgery or radiation or anything. And this is one of so many examples I saw. So of course, we don't want to make any kinds of promises, but it was amazing to see how people would literally shift and change. Men, of course, as well, but I'm giving you the examples of women. And especially when they started to free up this space to bring and reinvigorate their ojas. Many had come, I remember some would come thinking they were coming, this was in Thailand, to an island to party. So they were young, maybe in their early or mid-20s, and had been doing a lot of drugs, maybe drinking a lot, traveling a lot. And it was amazing to see the difference of what would happen throughout this time, to just really witness what was happening also in their healthfulness, finding themselves to a tantric yoga school, actually. So in that way, our health, it's unbelievable to notice. And I'll tell you a little secret, I so often hear from women, or actually from people in general, if I hop on my clinic, like the virtual clinic, and I meet clients, or I hop on these courses, and I've had a time where I've been in my own yoni sadhana, or my own yoni yoga. So for example, self-pleasuring, or I've been with a partner making love, or just simply, doing one of the practices I'm going to share with you, nourishing the yoni or yoni steam or something like that. So often people say to me, oh, you look different. Did you get a haircut? Or, it's amazing to see, oh, you look radiant, Tiffany. What is it that happened? And now it's become so predictable for me that always, there's a little bit of a smile. And if it's with any of you, then I can say, well, actually, today I was doing some of my yoni practices. But it's amazing to see how it relates. And most of us know that, right? When there is that kind of sensual openness, or when this area is free, we also notice that we feel glowing. We can say it as simple as that. But that doesn't have to mean that we're having sex with someone. And that, I think, is going to be a shift in perspective as well that we'll share this evening. It can also mean that, but it can also mean a whole host of other things. So we're going to look at that tonight. So health, and then also our life cycles. When we start coming to this yoga that really opens the space of the yoni, it also really contributes to more balance, so we can gracefully transition through the various phases. So this can be for young women as they make their way into menarche, so as they make their way into their period, so getting their cycle, to women also during the cycle of fertility, and for women also then in the cycle or the movement, the transition into menopause. So all of these yoni yoga practices can really help to free and bring a naturalness to how things want to gracefully move in all of those phases. And I work with so many women who are challenged with everything from, imbalances in our periods, imbalances also in fertility, imbalance during menopause, young women imbalances around, puberty. So in this way, these can really be liberation tools, because as they free this up, and some of you have not yet come to menopause, as they free this up, it can also help a graceful transition, for example, to menopause. So there's a lot that can be offered here. So that's the why in many ways. And now what are some of the things we're going to look into this evening? So what's some of the yoni yoga and what I would call the sensuality sadhana? So a sadhana or a practice that connects us to our sensuality. That's what we could really call it. And we're going to talk tonight about both with ourselves and also with others. So with ourselves, but also with a partner. I mean, I said with others, and I was about to make a joke, like it could be with anyone. So if you want to do this with friends, you can also do this with friends. But, mostly it means with yourself or also with a partner. I have to say, though, women, years ago, I don't know if I told you this story yet, many years ago, with a dear friend, as we were learning these things also in this community of Tantra, many of these things, some also have come over the years. But I remember we both shared with each other that we'd never actually seen a cervix, because how do you see your own cervix? And we were talking about the cervix and, much that arises in Tantra, especially tantric sexuality, that expresses as the opening of the cervix. And so we got forceps and we looked at each other's cervixes. And it was one of the most powerful moments for me to see, as we're like best friends, to be able to see another woman's cervix with like love. I had so much love for her, and vice versa. And to just be so safe in that space also. And we had no sexual interest in each other. Not that that wouldn't have been fine also, but it was really, there was just such a pure openness to be like, wow, that's a universe. That's a yoniverse. Oh my God, like what is inside us? And something that really, awestruck me from that moment. So in that way, women, I'm saying that because I'm saying with others, it could be with a dear friend, actually. There are ways in which we don't have to say that this has to be with your partner necessarily. Megan is saying there are some great websites run by women who share images of their cervixes. When I had a year of abnormal precancerous paps, it was a godsend. Yes, I've heard of this also before, Aditi, that there is this sharing, just as there's sharing of breasts, as some women go through breast cancer and mastectomy. So some of these as well. And I think it's just absolutely beautiful. Now, seeing your own cervix is also possible. I mean, you can also, with a mirror and with forceps, because you're going to need to open, or you can ask also if you go to the doctor to take a photo. I mean, honestly, I had one woman, she's like, I have a PAP next week. I'm just going to ask my nurse practitioner, because she's a friend and it's been years. Why can't she take a photo of my yoni? And she said to me, Tiffany, this is amazing. I saw part of me I'd never seen. I mean, in that way, it's also a secret portal, right? Which is beautiful, which is so beautiful, right? Like we can almost think of it in many ways, or come to know it as the sacred altar within all of us. And there's some awe that can start to come in that. So where we really start with the sensuality sadhana is that of really acquainting ourselves with ourselves. Many of us in our conditioned culture around sensuality, or really, let's say, because there's very little sensuality in collective sexuality. It's missed the point of sensuality, let's say it in that way. But in much of our conditioning around sexuality, we've lost touch, or we've given it over to the responsibility or the role of someone else to wake it up in us. And this is one of the powerful things that I've learned from Tantra and also Ayurveda, is that this is our responsibility, actually. The more you know your own yoni, the more you can choose how you move with it, how you also bring sensual exploration and how you might invite another also to be in that exploration with you. Without that education, it is very difficult for another person to know what you're really inviting them to do. And it's amazing to see, especially young women, when they start to become more empowered in this way, how they become more choiceful also about sexuality. You know, I recently had a young woman who attended one of these courses. I think she did all 3 levels. And she said to me, Tiffany, it's amazing because I was starting to get really in the collective now for early 20 somethings. There's so much push towards polyamory. And she said, after you shared with us, you know, really the sacredness of this altar and the energetics of welcoming other people, and I started doing my own self practices, she said, I just realized that that wasn't aligned at all for me. And she said, about 3 months later, I came to connect with a man who was like no other man that I've ever had connection with. And they're having they continue to have a beautiful exploration together. But it required, firstly, her own self practice, her own self sadhana, and her recognition of the beauty of her own yoni, the beauty of this altar. Polyamory is really like having multiple partners. So one of you was asking this. So polyamory is polyamory, so multiple love. So having multiple partners or various partners is becoming more and more, you know, it's thought of more and more as liberated sexuality. Again, it can be medicine for some time, and for others, it can actually bring a lot of challenge, I would say, for some constitutions and for some beings. So, you know, each one has their own karma and their own dharma. But the point in saying this is really that as we start to localize ourselves into our own sensuality, into our own recognition of this great altar within us, we also start to recognize that it doesn't require, you know, the great ojas within us, that vitality doesn't require someone else to liberate it, but it could invite someone else to be involved in it also. It could celebrate in sexuality or lovemaking with another. So what are some of the self practices with the sensuality?
Can I just, before you go on, Tiffany,
Yes,
can I just,
absolutely, Lisa.
just a comment on what you were just saying about the polyamory and that, and I kind of went through that period of time where I thought, okay, I'll try this. This is something that appeals. I thought this is what I want. And as you explore it a little bit more, and as I got to know my body a little bit more, that realization that while that might be something down the road, my right now is to have that, to really understand and have somebody really know me as well as I know me. Yes. And then that kind of branches out. So it's really, it was a journey, and I think, you know, a lot of people do feel like polyamory is the way to go. It's not the only way to go. And it really, you know, as you say, it is a choice. And yeah, so it is a journey, but it wasn't until I really started to understand my own body and what felt good for me energetically that I realized that that's maybe down the road, but not today. So
thank you for sharing, Lisa, also, because it can also be really vulnerable to share about that. There's a lot of I would just say cultural context and conditioning also, and I felt it a lot in Canada towards monogamy. And for some of us, monogamy maybe isn't the entirety of our sensual exploration with others. And, you know, there's just so many conditionings around all of this. And Ayurveda, as I was sharing earlier with Carrie's questioning, it's again a presence-based medicine. What is the most serving for a being in any given moment? And I have seen some women who have really, it hasn't necessarily been the permanent choice for their lives, but have gone through periods of having more than one partner, which has actually been really liberating for them. We all have different schisms, right? Our lives appear in very different ways than we all ever imagined, don't they? And so in that way, this can also just hypothetically bring some questioning to some of the monogamy monogamy kind of ideology. We can say it in that way as well. So each one of us connecting to what our deepest needs are. I'm thankful that you shared that also, Lisa. Okay, so with ourselves, some of the things we're going to touch into. Breathing practices. So it's like, oh, I thought we were going to talk about yoni massage again. No, actually breathing can help to be a yoga for the yoni, in fact. 5 sense awakening. So 5 sense practices. So working through the 5 senses can also be very enlivening for the yoni, and also very enlivening for ojas, for vitality. Free movement, and we're going to talk about that, yoni and hridayam, or the heart. We're going to also look at the purification, the nourishment, and the strengthening of our yoni. So how we can take sadhana practices that help with all of that, and self-pleasuring. So let's start to dive into this a little bit. So firstly, breathing. So what does breathing have to do with the yoni? Actually, in Tantra, it's very well understood that the genitals, the breath, and the mind create a trinity of connection. So whether it's the male or the female, and in men, again, just to remind you, it's called the lingam. So whether it's the lingam or the yoni, and the breath and the mind are directly linked. And we can see this, for example, with orgasming, right? We can see that, dependent upon how our breath is going and what we're thinking about, we might orgasm or not, for example, or a man may ejaculate or not. But if breath is slowed down, we can affect the mind, and thus we can affect the genitals. Also, there's this relationship that happens between all three, actually. But also the power and the energy that can be held and stirred up in the genitals can be directed towards certain positive thinking, positive thoughts, towards actualized thinking, towards manifestation. It can be sort of channeled in one way or another. And that's really helped with what we're thinking about, but also how we're breathing. So learning deep breathing and learning to breathe into the space can really liberate the area. And a lot of us have cut our breath off about here, kind of upper rib cage. We've really retracted, and there's an anxious breath that lives kind of in this upper part. So in yoga in general, even teaching deepened breathing, what we might call like three-parted breathing, helps us to breathe all the way down into the abdomen. But what I actually suggest for us as women is to actually start to think about pelvic breathing. So even now, I would invite you to do it with me. So sit up nice and tall. And as you start to inhale through the nose, and inhale all the way down. Feel like you're taking the inhale down, down, down towards the pelvic floor, and you're letting the pelvic floor relax, almost like it swells with the breath. And then as you exhale from the mouth, and feel like you're drawing it up from the pelvic floor. It's coming all the way up through the belly, through the rib cage, through the chest, and out. And then allow this to move again. Take a nice full inhale in through the nose and feel like you're inhaling all the way down towards the pelvic floor, to that hammock at the bottom of the body. Let that release and open and welcome the breath. Hold it for a second. And then exhale and let that soften and let it melt out of you. Let it come once more in this way. Inhale. Really inhale long and full. And as you do, yes, the lungs might stop somewhere, but feel like you're breathing in and the belly gets bigger. And then you breathe all the way down, right down towards your pelvic floor, below the vagina, below the vaginal opening. That whole space is opening. And then exhale and soften and release all of the air. Sharings, how does this feel for all of you? I'm wondering, just doing this 3 times, how that is for anyone. Anyone want to share anything? Anything you're noticing? Did anyone notice that until we brought attention there, that there might be clenching or holding? Could you notice a difference? Could you notice any sense of letting go at all? Anything that was there for anyone? Yeah, Leanna's saying she's finding it a bit difficult. Yeah, and some of us can feel almost like the area is almost like held or atrophied, or there's a certain contracting or protection. What did you feel?
Yeah, so I find it very difficult to kind of direct my breath there. Like it almost kind of stops in my belly, and it's just more of like a thinking that it's going down instead of actually feeling the breath. So I think that's definitely something I need to continue to work on.
Yes, which of course, physiologically, it's not really that we're bringing oxygen or breath to that space, but we're definitely directing prana. So there's a direction of prana that's happening in that area. And there can be, if we're really drawing, what's happening with the diaphragm, everything is we're really filling up the lungs. And then there can be a dropping out, a releasing of the belly, and then even a release down into that pelvic floor as well. Any other? Sorry, go ahead, Leanne.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I do feel like clenching.
Yes.
So I do clench.
Yes. Any other sharings? Anything else anyone wanted to share or noticing?
When you're breathing in, is your stomach kind of expanding?
Exactly, Colleen. It starts to expand. It's like the rib cage expands, then the tummy expands almost like a balloon. And it's almost like that balloon had a bottom also, which goes right down to your pelvic floor. Did it feel like that for you, that the stomach was expanding?
Well, I made it expand because at first it wasn't, my stomach was not expanding. And so I consciously let it expand.
Good, that's great, because a lot of us grip our tummies, a lot of our stress response is held there. You see, stress is one of the greatest blockers for our ojas and for the yoni. So a lot of us block our breath, and we've also been told to hold our tummies back as well, right? So it's like no one wants to, so we hold that in, but then our breath can't access. And then what happens? We also get really anxious. We're not very sensually alive. We're not very, not as much pleasure is there. There's more cortisol, more stress response happening in the body. So even just this deepening breath, you start to notice like you relax. It's almost like your seat of gravity is in a different place. So you can feel your gravity somewhere lower within your being as well. And that's an interesting one as well to just play with and feel. Carrie's saying I'm tingling, but I've had sex like 5 times in the last 48 hours. Is that why? That might also be why, Carrie. That's also possible. Good for you. Any other sharings?
I noticed, it's Donna. I noticed for me anyway, it was a bit awkward at first, the first couple of goes, because of when I practiced the Dirga breathing, the 3 parts, I always start with belly and move up on the inhale and reverse on the exhale. So it was really strange for me to grasp it. I think I got it, but it took me a while to get over that.
Yes, and what you can do, Donna, is just rather than, so it really is Dirga breath, but rather than just starting at the belly, start at the pelvic floor. So go like pelvic floor, like 4-parted breath. So go like pelvic floor, belly, rib cage, chest. As
on
you
the inhale.
Yeah, on the inhale.
Oh,
So
I must have misunderstood you then, because I thought you said on the inhale, start at the top and go down.
I really just meant feel like your breath is really filling you all up, but this is good. So do it in that 3-parted way where you're filling the bottom of the receptacle first. Absolutely.
Perfect.
As much as you can.
It feels more natural for me.
Yes, perfect. And those of you who have learned Dirga before, that's that 3-parted breath. It's almost like we're adding a 4th part to it. Does that make sense to everyone? So it's almost like you take your breath into the very bottom of the receptacle first, fill up the pelvic floor, the abdomen, the rib cage, and then up into the chest. And as you exhale, release the chest, release the rib cage, release the abdomen, and then release the pelvic floor. And many of us, we have that clenching in the stomach, like Colleen was speaking to, but we also have that clenching happening so much in through the pelvic floor. And even that tingling that Carrie's speaking to, it can be because we've had sensuality and sexuality, but it also can be that you start feeling more aliveness, like you're literally bringing prana to that space. And prana will do what she needs to do. We can leave the space to her. It's like we leave it to God, we leave it to life. So we just introduce the prana and then we see what emerges from that. For our libido, this can be a libido changer. Women, those of us who may be experiencing atrophy, or dryness in through that space, that can also start to change. There's so many ways in which just this breathing can bring a huge outcome, actually. Some of the other ways that breathing I often suggest is also just this recognition of the round muscle connection. So all the round muscles in the body have a connection. So for example, the mouth, the eyes, the yoni, the anus, these are all round muscles. And even when you create like fists like this, it's a bit like round muscles as well. So these round spaces, they are all connected. So if you start to notice that you're getting tight through here, or you get tight in your eyes as well, like all day we're concentrating on the computer like this, what's happening also to your yoni? So even with our breathing, we can do breathing that helps to release these spaces. So for example, and this is why secondarily, I have written the open mouth breathing. Just letting the mouth be open. Everyone try it right now. And even fluttering the eyes a bit to really allow them to relax. There's such a relationship between these. Even doing a little bit of this, a certain release, it's again that cagings and complexes, and then the cage and release, to release the hands. You know, all of this gets again tightened, hardened in us. So a lot of us will notice these spaces also start to get hardened. So both with ourselves, whether it's in sensuality, whether we're doing yoni massage or we are in pleasure with ourselves, or it's just throughout our day as well. You know, bringing an awareness to, oh, am I really contracted in all of this space? You know, noticing how much anxiety, how much stress response comes into all these round muscles, and thus also repeats itself or finds itself mirrored into the yoni. And then we can consciously bring connected breath that helps to allow for that round muscle connection. So feeling the yoni in the mouth, feeling the eyes in the mouth as you breathe, but breathing through the mouth. So the first and the second are kind of connected, you know, doing this with an open mouth breathing. Everyone try it, the inhale and the exhale. Allow the yoni to be relaxed also. And you can even hear, to exaggerate it right now, I'm also adding a little bit with this, the sounding with breath. So actually, as you can see, all four of these could be connected. They could just be one thing that you're actually doing, like being aware of the pelvic breath, doing some open mouth breathing, and bringing sounding, because sounding, just natural sounding, creates a resonance through our structure. And our natural voice has its own, what we call nada. And that nada means its own sacred sound. It has its own sacred vibration that's very healing. It's directing prana also. So even just when we feel that tightness coming, or to bring healing in that yoni yoga, just sounding. So it might look like inhaling and then sounding. So everyone try it. Now, any sound that comes out for you, and you might change and fluctuate. What are you noticing as you're doing this? Are you noticing, even for some women, I also noticed at the beginning, and this was for me also, a shyness, you know, even with myself, of doing this, like almost like, oh, that's like an orgasmic sound or something that's coming out. Like, I don't know if I want to go there, right? Anything coming up, like any trepidation like that coming up for anyone, or how you feeling?
I have a question.
Sure, Lisa.
That actually feels pretty good. I remember learning that at a Tantra week that I was at, and it's really amazing how that breath and the sound all going together. But you were talking about the round muscles. I quite often get a real flutter around my eyes. Is this breathing, how can I direct it towards that, or do I still direct it towards the yoni? How does that connect, and how would I address that?
Yeah, a lot of us will get fluttering also, for example, in the moment of orgasm, right? Like the mouth is affected, the eyes are of course affected as well. But in our lives, if we're noticing, and if that's what you're asking also, Lisa, that we notice that our eyes are holding, or we can literally be breathing into the eyes. So if you, at any point, you can feel like you are directing prana and breath to any point of the body. And by relaxing there, you may notice, but consciously relaxing also, you know, even if we're softening, closing the eyes, consciously bringing relaxation to the space around them, not a tightened close. Can you see the difference even when I do that? It's like we can really do the closing versus softening the eyes. And the same with the mouth, noticing. I hear again and again from women the amount of tension that we hold in here. Any of you, just while I'm doing this, going like, yeah, I have that. Like, just take a moment to rub into this space, this TMJ that can happen here, lockjaw. There are great marma points, Ayurvedic marma points in through this whole area. And a lot of our stress, tension, vata energy, our energy of being dispersed as well, not being grounded, can get held in this area. Again, these are quite circular, round, even into the space of the jaw again, right? So a lot of this breathing, releasing in through here, this area, the vocal cords, is directly connected to our yoni. And women, many of you have had children and you know this, right? I'm here actually, dear friends of mine arrived yesterday. I have 2 beautiful babies. And her husband, who's a very close friend of mine, so he shares, you know, everything. He said, oh God, I knew when the second baby was coming because she started making the Darth Vader noises. They started, it was like 11 at night and I heard like, "Arr," and he's like, oh no, it's happening, you know. And I mean, we're all teasing about this, but he said, it's amazing. She's so quiet and sweet. But when the babies were born, wow, the sounds that were coming out, right? All the sounds. So we all know that this, the more this is open, the more the yoni is also open. But it also, you know, it relates in through here, it relates into the tension that can be had in the eyes as well. So even, you know, little massages into the space, but also breathing. Oh. Just taking a practice of this, yodeling, chanting, letting yourself sound, but not like I have to, you know, make these noises. A kind of authentic sounding. Authentic sounding can be very powerful for releasing this whole area and also bringing some release as well to the yoni. Have we frozen or can you all still hear me? Are we frozen and me going, ha? So this is some of the practices that I really would like you all to get more and more acquainted with breathing. Okay, and it's really quite intuitive actually, but you will notice really having a relationship with the breath, the vocal cords, the sounding, all of this can really renew and bring health to our yonis. So much can move there. Secondarily, before we come to a break. So in our practice, this can be both with ourselves, but also with others in our sensuality sadhana. The other thing that's very powerful, and I would often do this in workshops where we're together with people, is waking ourselves up to the 5 senses in a sensual way. So we would actually sit in circles and I would bring dark chocolate and some feathers. And I would bring, you know, also, we would actually blindfold each other so we weren't seeing actually. But then we would also bring little chimes, maybe a nice scarf or something as well, and then some essential oils or maybe some incense. And partners would go to their partners in the workshop and just introduce the various senses. This is what true sensuality is, to be awake through the 5 gateways. You know, we often relegate it just to the sexuality of something that's like genital bumping, to be really brash about it, right? It's like it completely gets lost. And what does it look like to be made again, to feel that sense of making love to life? It happens through the 5 gateways, actually, of the senses. So sensuality sadhana can also involve waking up your 5 senses. You know, taking time or taking a ritual, and this could be on new and full moon for you. Or this is also something we share in Ayurveda, to daily cleanse the 5 senses. And I've mentioned this before. But it can also be having little rituals with yourself where, you know, before you're going to give yoni massage, for example, you get some really nice smells, a bit of rose oil, lavender oil. You get yourself a couple strawberries or, you know, a little bit of chocolate. You also might, for example, have, you know, something that's tickly. You know, one of the things I love, those things you get at the dollar store, those head things. I have no idea what they're called. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Those head scratcher things. They're one of the best. No, I don't know what. Okay, I'll have to look up what the heck it's called. They're these Chinese things that are like so sensual. Yeah, most of you are going like, yeah. And you know, sometimes I just, the amount of release and relax that happens just with that creation is amazing. Head massager, Megan calls it. Yeah, let's call it a head massager. So those, you know, I might have that for myself as well, or just touching myself, just giving myself a gentle massage. And then listening also, hearing, you know, the sound of small chimes or the sound, some music that we might love. So waking up in that, in this sadhana of waking up to the 5 senses is so powerful for also waking up the yoni. The yoni starts to become enlivened by this because she is the womb of creation. She is the womb of all 5 senses in many ways. She's the womb of the dance of all of nature. So if we cut ourselves off from nature, from what we smell, taste, see, touch, hear, we're cutting ourselves off from our wholeness, from our great sensuality. And you can do this for yourself, actually, women. You know, having your ritual bath, having your evening once a week where you say, that's for me. And you get yourself, you know, a nice bath caddy. You know, these beautiful bath caddies, they're really in style now, right? So you get yourself a beautiful bath caddy with all those nice things, the things you want to smell, taste, see, touch, hear. You will notice that this starts to free more and more your sensuality within you. So before we come to a break, any questions that are there around those? There's so much we could speak to with these, but it gives you some idea. Are you all getting excited for your bath caddy and what you're going to give yourself? You're like, great. Tiffany said dark chocolate is Ayurvedic. Excellent. Okay, sweet ones. Let's take a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at 18 after. Okay, so just a 5-minute break, a bio break to grab whatever you need, and then we'll see each other back in 5 minutes. Okay, enjoy. On recording as well. I think it would make the most sense to not rush next week's session if I gave you all a 6 session, if you would like that. So if we met for, rather than just 5, we met for 6 sessions. So there's a bit more spaciousness to the content that's left, you know. We could spend a couple years in all of this. So, so we will have a 6 session. So next week won't be our last, okay? And those of you who feel like, oh, you're complete and you want to watch, you know, the other one on video, you'll have that, but it just gives us a bit more spaciousness, okay? So we're not content driven. We're also connection driven. So we can be with these things. Okay, so let's continue from here, loves. So these are already giving you some practices to really play with in the next week as well. The breathing, then your own 5 sense awakening, the sensuality sadhana. Then what are some other suggestions offered, especially from Tantra? Another one, which, you know, we so often see and think, oh, this is just a new agey thing that women and goddess circles are really getting into dance, you know, but actually it's always been known, it's been well known, and we can see it from the temple dancers of India to the Sufi dervish whirlers to the great, you know, what Bollywood is a kind of a derivative of, but many of these Persian dancers also, that there was something very mystical and very revealing, and also a sadhana, a literal practice that is found within movement, that's found within dance. And the feminine has always found great freedom through that. So one of the main ways that I can highlight for you, I'm not going to teach you dance, that's for another time, maybe together, and I would be the last person to teach you dance because my dance is entirely spontaneous. But actually what we will do is in upcoming, so in the second level, we start to actually dance a little bit together. So I put on some music and we take some time for that as well together, which is beautiful. But free movement, especially that involves the space of hridayam, the heart, and the yoni. So these 2 areas are what are understood as the 2 seats of ojas. So I've said to you until now, I didn't want to complicate it too much, but I've said to you until now that the yoni is actually understood as the seat of our ojas, according to Ayurveda and according to the Vedas. But actually, it's said that there are 2 seats in the human body of ojas, in men and women, in the genitals and also in the heart. And these are the seats which we call para and apara ojas. Para means the great, apara means the less than great. It just means, you know, one means the infinite and one means the finite on some level, we could say it in that way. So para ojas, the great, the mother ojas, the great mother vitality, the life spark, is said to be living and to be born with us in our hearts. So we're all born with what's said to be actually 8 drops of this great nectar, this great elixir within our hearts. And it's part of what our biological clock is actually. It kind of ticks down as our life goes, but it's also the thing that gives us ojas for life, vitality for life, vigor for life, heartful life force, if we could call it. The libido of the heart. Does that make sense when I say it in that way? Like that our hearts have a libido, that our hearts are alive to being in love with life, to being alive to life. And we are all given this. Some of the main ways that this can get, affected is through major addiction, through excessive sexuality also, and through long-term addiction or like a long-term trauma or something like that that's happened. Some of us can feel that. But luckily, the other ojas, the ojas that is held in our yoni or in our genitals, also for men, the apara ojas is one that can be renewed and rejuvenated. So this ojas is kind of the one we're given. We're all given our hearts with this heart elixir, you know, this libido for life. And then we're also given the capacity to renew the ojas within our yonis. And the main ways we do that is, one, the things we're talking about, like opening that creative portal, opening the womb, opening the yoni, letting it be free, but also through proper diet, through proper sleep, through, you know, proper lifestyles, rightly aligned lifestyles. We have proper apara ojas. We have proper vitality, and we all know that, right? If we sleep properly, if we're also eating properly. And actually the 3 pillars of good health, according to Ayurveda, are right diet, right sleep, and right sex. So it's interesting that right sex comes along with right sleep and right diet. Most people would not guess that because we don't realize the impact of our right sex. But if we channel the sexual energy properly, whether that's sexuality connected with another or ourselves, that energy really does contribute to our healthfulness or not. So it builds our ojas or it depletes it. So in that way, we can renew our apara ojas. And much of what we're doing here together is about keeping that apara ojas, the ojas of the yoni, strong and vital and free and flowing. So it can also support the ojas of the heart. And doing movement, free movement, dance that helps to move those 2 spaces. This is why any movements that get our hips moving, that get our hearts moving, free movement that allows that. And even as I'm doing it now, try it while you're seated there, even while you're seated, moving a little bit more in our hips, undulating a little bit, moving in through the heart space, you know, letting that happen. And a lot of us might even be shy to these kinds of movements. You know, we might relegate them as being overly sexualized. But there's something that happens when we free these 2 spaces. And even putting a hand on either space, you know, it's like what I was saying about the yoni massage. Like letting that space move, let the pelvis move, let the space of the hips move. A lot of us are like this from our phones and from our grief and from various things, letting that space open, reveal itself. And that's why I've had you also massaging in through the breasts and massaging also in through the yoni, because those areas really do hold so much. So this free movement, it can be lying down, it can be lying on your front, it can be standing up, it could be seated. But I would really like to suggest to all of you to start to free these 2 areas. Put on music you enjoy, you know, let yourself really be with something that will invigorate those areas. So that one's pretty self-explanatory, hey? You're all like, great integrations for this week. I get to dance like no one's looking. This is why pole dancing has become like a popularized thing. There's pole dancing studios because women are like, I want a pole dance. That's like really cool. And I can undulate and move. Women feel great. And it's a great workout to hold yourself up on a pole. I mean, it's ridiculous, some of the things women can do on these poles. But, you know, they're taking out the sexualization, or rather, let's just say again, invigorating, you know, the sensuality of it. And also what happens when you open those 2 spaces. So, okay, then some other things. So yoni purification is something in Ayurveda, and also even here, for example, in Central and South America, they've always had, you know, certain rituals for purifying, nourishing, and strengthening the yoni. And one we can do that comes from Ayurveda is what is called yoni steam, or what we might call also yoni swedana, so to sweat an area. You know, we have a steam box in Ayurveda, usually for the whole body, where we keep the head exposed and you steam the whole body with herbs. So there's an herbal steam that's introduced into this sweat box, and one sweats and releases, certain impurities, and the herbs enter into the pores. Similarly, yoni purification can be done in this way. Now, there are many articles out there that say you should never do this, and oh my God, Gwyneth Paltrow suggested, you know, yoni eggs and yoni purification through steam, and you know, there's lots of things. So I always get someone asking that. It's not necessarily something that you do every single day. Of course, we have to be aware of the imbalances that may be there for us. I've put some of the times we wouldn't do it. Usually we wouldn't do it also with an IUD because it can heat that which is already within us, right? So this is the main reason. But I always have women who use IUDs, and I know some of you do here, and they're like, I want to do it also. So I say, okay, just don't make the water too hot. It can be nice to just sit over some gentle warm water, just, feeling some of the herbs from that way. That's okay then, to do it in that way. Acute infections, you never do this while you have an acute infection or blisters or a lot of pain in the area. Although I have to say, women, I have worked with women who have had a lot of pelvic pain or yoni pain, which wasn't necessarily emanating from having any kind of blisters or open sores. And by doing this consistently, like anywhere in the body, by purifying the area, it started to find its own balance, its own healing. So I even wrote here, this can be a beautiful thing for you to do for yourself on new moon and full moon, to have those Amavasya and Purnima rituals. And here's a little example of a box. So usually each course, the women look up, these boxes, these yoni steam boxes, and then get someone in their life to make them one. So I would love to see if if you get these made, it would be beautiful for you to put them up on the Facebook page, because they can be made in different ways. Sometimes they're made in triangles or made like this. And I've put here for all of us some of the different herbs that we can use. So basically what you're doing, women, is how many of you have steamed your face before when you had a cold or a flu or anything? Have any of you done that before? Had a steam there? So in the same way, what you're basically doing is you're creating a yoni tea. You're creating a tea and you're boiling it like you would a tea with those herbs. And then you're letting, or just like you would do with ginger or garlic or eucalyptus for the face. You can also use these in essential oils, but you'll just use 1 or 2 drops of these because essential oils are quite strong, right? They're quite caustic. Otherwise, you'll boil these as herbs or as a tea. I even say to some women, you can also purchase, for example, a women's tea. Like there's a yogi tea that's a women's tea. And that can be a wonderful one. You drink it this way. But for period pain, for cramps, for balancing the yoni, it can be wonderful to put it in water and yoni steam it. So you drink it here and you drink it here. It's like you're drinking it in both ways. So even steaming, if you're like, I'm not really into, or it intimidates me to get these, different herbs and mix them together, but it can be fun for each one of us to play with. So you're just going to make a strong tea, which might look like making about 1 liter with 2 to 3 tablespoons of these herbs, whether you do a mixture of them, right? So if you want to mix them, these are all great ones. And I've put all of and I've especially used Western herbs more than our Indian Ayurvedic herbs, because they can be more difficult to find. But of course, in Ayurveda, we also have used things like shatavari or other herbs for that area. Questions? I see somebody might have questions. Yeah, Lisa?
Yes. When you say we can mix them, any one of these can be mixed with something else? Like these
Yes.
are all good combinations?
Yes,
Okay.
there's no
There isn't anything
challenge.
that says,
No,
okay.
there's no contraindication as far as mixing any of these ones together. So you shouldn't find,
Okay.
And for some of you, if you deal with, for example, a lot of leukorrhea, if you deal with a lot of discharge from the area, oregano is great for that. Rosemary is also great for that. If you have a history, for example, of yeast infections, so if you've been dealing, a lot throughout your life with yeast infections, those are also really great. Like the antifungal aspects of rosemary is really wonderful. If you deal with UTIs pretty consistently, urinary tract infections, ones that are more anti-inflammatory and more relaxing, like lavender, marigold, really great. Calendula, I love using calendula in that case. So, and in general, if it's just for a tonic, like you want to steam your face, you want to steam your pores, you want to steam your yoni, once or twice a month, it won't throw off, oftentimes people say the pH balance will be thrown off, etc. No, you can give a gentle steam to this area. We go into the shower and our yonis receive steam also, right? So it's just that you're not sitting on it every single day, and it's not super hot. It should be warm, so it really feels like it helps the area to leach. If you don't have one of these, which most of us don't, right? So the simple way that I do it is sitting on the edge of a chair with a bucket. I have my specific bucket that I use for yoni steam, and then I put a nice big blanket over and around my lap and over my legs, and just sit so the whole area becomes almost like a little steam tunnel. Does that make sense to everyone when I say that? So you just wrap as much as you can, you sit your bum at the edge of something, and you let yourself be kind of over the bucket. and just let the herbs, and usually it will depend. This allows us to be closer. So sitting on one of these, you're only about a foot away from the herbs, right? But when you sit on a chair, you're usually a couple feet, unless you put a little stool under the bucket. So that's the other option. Just put a little box or a little stool or something under the bucket to help with it. Or get a wicker chair. I love it, Colleen. That's great. Exactly. You could use a wicker chair. And even Colleen is amazing at thrift finds and various things. Even someone showed me, this reminds me, that they bought a wicker stool and they just cut out the center of it. I was like, that's a brilliant idea. They were able to, like, one of the women did it really easily. So she just cut out the little center of the kind of thatching in the center. So lots of options in that way. But the wicker chair, yeah, it will allow for it to breathe through, which is very nice as well. And then after we've done this, just drying off gently. You can shower if you feel, but just a gentle drying off so the area doesn't stay dampened and wet, obviously, throughout the day, right? So this can be a beautiful ritual for us to do, especially when the yoni is neutral. Let's say it in that way. If you're dealing with specific yoni conditions, then it's better to see me or to talk to someone who works with yoni steaming. And then it's better for us to, work with that. But I have seen amazing, amazing things using yoni steaming. Women also with infertility, with, cramping with periods, with menopausal challenges, so many different things. It's just like any kind of purification that we can do. This one is very, very helpful as well. So this is more about our yoni steaming. Then we have a practice in Ayurveda, which is more about, now we've cleansed the yoni. Now, how do we nourish the yoni? So we've already been doing one of them, which is simple yoni massage. Yoni massage is a wonderful way to really nourish the yoni. And women, whether this is that your yoni is dealing with dryness or not, because usually I have women say, well, my yoni's perfectly fine. There's no dryness, there's no laxity, there's no atrophy. But over time, I think every single woman can share that the yoni starts to change shape. It starts to change elasticity. Various things will happen, whether we've had children or not. There starts to also be some atrophy that can happen for some of us. So nourishing the yoni is as important as you're nourishing, for example, the skin on our faces, as I was saying before. And as we age also, I notice it now as well. It's like our décollage. Oh, this is different. The skin's getting different here, right? And it all starts to get different in different places. So also in the yoni, giving oil and love. The massage is one about introducing oil, but secondarily, or let's just say firstly, it's also about introducing attention and loving contact, loving connection to that part of ourselves. Really being in awe again of this place that holds our ojas, that holds our vitality, that holds all our creativity, and starting to explore it. Even if I say those words and that feels a little far gone for you, saying to yourself, okay, what is held here? Like as I touch here, or as I breathe here, or as I sound here, or as I purify here, what is this place within me? Most of us have not taken the time in our lives to really question or explore what this beautiful sacred altar is that exists within us. And this is really what this is about, is that exploration and a deep acquaintance. So yoni massage is one way of nourishing. And as I shared with you before, it can be a daily practice. For those of us who feel like we start to get a little bit itchy, or the oil daily feels like we don't really need that, we might already be a bit oily in our skin, even just massage without oil is a way of nourishing. It gets everything moving, it tonifies, just like as though we were massaging our shoulders, So it doesn't always have to be with oil, but oil can be very helpful as well. Or it can be a ritual that we do, say, once a week. Like once a week, we massage with oil and we make sure we introduce a little bit of oil. But other ways we can deeply nourish the area is through practices such as yoni pichu and yoni basti. So yoni basti actually means an enema, but an enema of the yoni. So in Ayurveda, we have different ways we introduce enema, actually. We have a heart enema, which is we create a dough well on the heart and we put oil in it. So the heart can be filled with the loving touch of the warm oil, for example. And we call that an enema. So we also have a yoni enema. But for us women, for all intents and purposes, between us, this is more of an involved practice. So I'm not really going to suggest for any of you to do that at home, to be really doing enemas to the yoni. But it's good to know that it is a practice there to help balance, especially if we have more involved conditions of the yoni. But what we can do is we can occasionally do yoni pichu. And when I say occasionally, I might suggest again that this might be like full and new moon ritual or something you do every couple weeks for a lot of us. If we deal with extreme dryness, or if we're dealing with postnatally, then I suggest doing Yoni Picho pretty much every day. So especially postnatally, it can be amazing to bounce back after labor, actually, Yoni Picho. But what's Yoni Picho? Picho means cotton ball, actually. So Yoni Picho is the easiest way I suggested is using an organic tampon. But another way you can do it is with a little piece of gauze or an organic cotton ball, literally. And you dip it into warm oil or into an oil like we've made, like a yoni oil. So an oil that's appropriate for the yoni, that's been warmed. And then you place it inside the yoni. And you let it stay inside the yoni so inside the vagina, you place it kind of midway within the vagina where it feels comfortable. And it should really be soaked so it doesn't feel dry, like you're not pressuring it in any way, right? This one, Liana, is okay to do with an IUD. Yeah, absolutely. This one's okay. Yes. So with this, then it's great to put legs up the wall. How many of you know what I mean when I say legs up the wall? Yeah, or legs up onto a chair, or, okay, great. I see lots of head shaking. So getting our bum a little bit higher so the oil can just kind of enter into the area. How many of you feel good just me saying that? How many of you feel like, oh yeah, some warm oil in my yoni? Like it's weird, but okay, that feels kind of nice just thinking about it. A lot of women, when I first tell them, it's amazing to see their face. They're like, oh yeah, okay. I don't really get women saying like, no way, I'm not doing that. And it's amazing because it might be such a new practice for a lot of us, but it can be very nourishing. It's also excellent, like I said before, post-menopause, because the yoni does start to experience dryness and it starts to experience some tightening. Or if we're dealing with libido issues or fissures, we start getting tension or small cracks in that area. But generally, throughout the life cycles as women, just keeping that area elasticized, it will allow for the bounce back, the pliability. It will help build collagen in the area. It's a very powerful practice, this Yoni Pichu. Donna says, be careful not to mix up your yoni oil with your nasi oil like I did. That's so cute, Donna. I didn't know you did that. Cute and also strong. The eucalyptus oil and the camphor is very purifying. One time someone else told me about this, and it could be good if someone had fibroids or something, but it's not good if we want to introduce nourishment rather than purification. It's true. So I showed you this oil before, which I travel a lot with also. This is our yoni oil. I showed you, didn't I? Did I show it to you before? And it has that beautiful orange color, from the sea buckthorn. So make sure it's orange before you introduce it. And warm it, women. So the best way to warm it is like put it in a mug of hot water or do like a double boiler. So you have, a pot of water and then you have a small other pot where you just heat up a little bit of the oil and then you roll your tampon and really soak it in it, just a small tampon, or you soak a piece of gauze and then you insert it and leave it for a good 20 minutes. You can even leave it for 30 minutes if that feels good. Remove it and then just wipe off the area. If you feel to shower, you absolutely can after this practice. But just wiping it off as well can be wonderful because you don't have to remove all the oil. It will start to absorb into the area. And there's so much that can start to happen. For example, this oil has shatavari in it, which is a wonderful estrogenic herb. So it can be very balancing for those of us who experience like period pain, who experience fibroids or cysts, for example, or postmenopausally who are having that dryness or lowered libido. Shatavari is really beneficial to introduce in this way, also orally, like taking it as an herb, but also in that way. So Yoni Pichu is a practice that I've introduced now to literally hundreds of women, and I hear constantly from women about how this has changed their relationship to their yoni, how they're also feeling the aliveness, the ojas that starts to be reinvigorated there, health-wise, what it's doing for them. So let me know, okay, if you have questions, if things arise. But see if you might want to, practice this, okay? Some women ask me what other oils you can use. You can use other oils like jojoba oil, or if you feel you want to use a sweet almond or a coconut oil as well. But sometimes women will have, or warm sesame is what we always suggested in Ayurveda. Some women will have responses. So we have to just check if our pH responds to it, then don't be using that oil again. You know, each one of our yonis, it does have an acidic pH purposely, actually. It's like to kill off the dud sperm, you know, to really ward off disease in many ways. But there's a lot of reasons, you know, that we have this acidity in our yonis. So if you're feeling that there's an itch or anything that happens, then discontinue the use of that oil. It's best to use like a yoni appropriate oil. Okay. And there are various companies that also make yoni oils. Okay. And then we have yoni strengthening. So what are some of the things we can do for yoni strengthening, to strengthen the yoni? How many of you have heard of Kegels before? Kegel exercises? Have you heard of them? Can you just put up your hand so I'm aware? Okay, great. If you haven't heard of Kegels before, then please do a little bit of research. And Kegels are kind of like the Western version of deepened tantric practices and Taoist practices. So Kegels are a new version of these practices, these ancient tantric and Taoist arts that women always knew about. And some of the amazing practices, and it's too bad because I couldn't find my egg women, which means I haven't been doing enough practice with it. Because when I moved to this new room about a week ago, I haven't had my egg out yet for practice. And I was thinking, oh, Tiffany, that's really been a long time for me, actually. So I couldn't find it to show you all. But I have another, where is our other? It was back here. Here's one. So this is a yoni egg. And in Taoism, which is similar to Tantra, but comes from the Chinese system. So in Taoism, yeah, someone may have got an interesting surprise in my old room. It's true, Megan. They're like, what's this crystal? Wonderful. That's true. So in Taoism, in the Chinese tradition, this is where this comes from, the practice of the jade egg, especially. This is a rose quartz, but the practice of egg exercises. And basically what they are is they're ancient Kegel practices, but using a tool, which is a gemstone that introduces certain energies to the yoni. Just like when we use certain, you know, gemstones, like I have these on today, this is rose quartz. So these are small, tiny rose quartz beads, crystal beads. They have a very specific heartful energy. Each one of these crystals has an energy to it. So also it was well known in Taoism that when you introduce this egg into the area of the yoni, you're basically opening the altar of the yoni. You know, you're increasing longevity. And in the Chinese, even in Chinese medicine, many women are given this practice. You know, this practice was something that was an ancient practice, ancient Taoist practice amongst women that shared. And even today, you see it survived in many, many ways. And it was usually done with jade, is the most traditional, because jade is the most harmonizing for all of the inner organs. It kind of works in from the yoni to all the inner organs. But like at Rasa, we have 3 different stones because the different stones have different benefits. You know, so we have rose quartz as well, which is very heartful, brings a lot of love to the area, bathes it in love. We also have obsidian, and the obsidian really helps with trauma and sort of drawing out any kind of negative energies that might be held in the area. But jade is a very powerful one. And basically at the beginning, my suggestion is, so like on Rasa, we have different sizes. But my suggestion is that we start with a medium size and we just basically do a ritual of placing it inside, just like we were going to place a crystal on our heart or place a crystal on our navel chakra, on Manipura chakra. We put the crystal inside and then we just be with it. We lie down, we let there be a little bit of yoni massage beforehand. It can be sensual, it can be sexual, but it can also just be an introduction of the egg into the area and feel its emanation for 10-15 minutes. And there's sort of stages to this practice. The next stage is that we can actually stand up and try to move it. And that's when we start to move towards more what I've written here, which is more like we're doing some of the exercises. We're moving it, for example, and we're even doing weightlifting. You know, some women will, the eggs that we have, they have a little hole in them. So you can even put like a non-waxed dental floss. So you can also pull it out. That's an easy, you know, exit as well for pulling it out. But you can also attach a little weight. So for some women, especially if they've had pelvic prolapse after childbirth, various things, or just with life in general, a little bit of weightlifting can help. But generally women, the egg in and of itself is already enough of a tool. So it's already enough of a weight and also holding it and moving it is enough of an isotonic contraction for the area that we don't really need to tone more than that. This has been a very, very marked practice that I've given to various women that have unfolded them, let's just say with pleasure. Women who have been without orgasm, women who haven't been able to experience orgasm, women who have also dealt with pelvic prolapse, women who have had trauma, and just generally for women of every life experience. Doing these practices has much to show us, and I know that it can be a little bit, even hearing it now, intimidating. Like, I'm doing what with what egg, with what kind of, what? This is a whole new area. And so I've had some women where it took them like 6 months to even introduce it. They got it and they just sat with it and were a bit like, that's a lot for me. But the hurdles of getting there, even bringing this practice, is something about a deep, deep self-care. And these egg exercises can be very, very powerful in their revelation and their exploration, and also in their revelation. So I would suggest to all of you that it might be something that, you take a little bit of time to contemplate and think about. And just like with other crystals, we can charge the crystal in the full moon, can be wonderful, and cleanse it also in the new moon. It's good, of course, to cleanse. We have all these instructions also at Rasa. So when you get these, but there's, of course, again, other companies who are selling yoni eggs. But this is part of the reason that we have them, because of the health promoting benefits that we see again and again for women. Also prenatally, it's amazing to see women who do more of these exercises, what happens for them for fertility, but also the bounce back that happens, the recuperation that happens after childbirth as well, when the area has received that tonus. I have one woman we've worked with who had 4 children. And she had quite a significant pelvic prolapse. And through many of these things, through the purification, especially through the nourishment of Yoni Pichu, and then also through these egg exercises, she consistently tells everyone, oh, you just have to do this. She tells all her friends, they constantly come to me. I'm telling you, this is it. It's all changed everything. My husband says sex has never been better. My libido's never been better. My orgasms are fantastic. I don't pee myself anymore. So, it's like, it really is significant. It's not just kind of a fun thing to be done. It really has significant benefits. And then a practice that we have in yoga is Mula Bandha, which is really about, or PC pull-ups. How many of you have done this before, where you draw up through the muscles of the yoni? So just as we did the pelvic breathing before, now bring your awareness down towards the pelvic floor. So there's that whole space, the hammock between the vaginal opening and the anus. There's these muscles in between, and they get quite lax if we don't work with them. So bring your attention to that band in between and find the space right in between. So not the yoni, not the anus, but the space right in between. See if you can bring your attention there. And then gently take a nice full inhale, exhale completely, hold your breath out, and now feel like you're drawing up, like you're tugging a small string up, those muscles in the center. Just gently locking it and drawing it up. Now release and inhale. Exhale again. Hold the breath out and now draw those muscles up. It's a very slight feeling, like there's a small string drawing up through the core of the body. Release and inhale. Let's try that once more. Exhale fully. Hold the breath out and now see if you can isolate those muscles. Keep the vagina and the anus relaxed, but drop through the center. Release it and inhale. This is very, very fine. Let's say it in that way. It can be very difficult to isolate at the beginning. We're used to drawing everything. So how many of you felt that? Like from the anus to the vagina, it's like we're just drawing everything up. We're pulling everything up. But the more you start to isolate that point in between, this is like a little flick switch. And there is a lot of our ojas, our sexual energy, our libido, our orgasmic potential It relates to that space. So if we, and also leakage of energy. So it's very clearly outlined in the Vedic texts and in the Tantric texts that if that space is not kept sort of, if we're not able to control it, that we can actually leak our ojas, like we're releasing our ojas, our energy out of us all the time. So this is a very powerful one for drawing the energy up and in, keeping it within us. And later I'm going to remind you of this next week. Also, when it comes to all of these practices with our sexuality with others, our sensuality with others. Because actually, when you're with a partner, having control of these things, having control of our breath, having control of these muscles, being able to move in these ways, will also amplify pleasure and the various types of orgasms that we can actually start to experience. This can also do this, though, for us, like just with ourselves, to be honest. Many women will start practicing this along with the breathing, and they'll have orgasms. Many women will say to me, I started to feel like an orgasm coming, Tiffany. I wasn't with someone, but it was coming of its own accord. So know that that also, you know, that orgasm possibility is within you. I don't know if I was sharing it with all of you, but, you know, I remember my own teachers sharing with me that, you know, this possibility that orgasm could arise at different moments in life, not just in the sexual act with another. And I thought, yeah, that's for like, you know, tantric yoginis of like the utmost, you know, those are like mythologies that you never ever, you know, actually experience, but you hear about. So sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. Right. And being so practical also, I thought, you know, I really want to see this and feel this. And the first time it happened, women, like a whiplash, was in meditation retreat. So I was sitting in retreat and there was a deep, profound meditation and then an orgasm. I just started to orgasm. And I remember in the moment when it occurred, the brain couldn't quite compute what it was. It knew that there was a pleasurable, enveloping experience, but it detached the idea that it has to be, you know, overtly sexual. Again, that orgasmic pleasure is our natural birthright on many levels. So you may start to do some of these practices and notice that you have like this pleasurable sensation that's similar to that which you experience also in the sexual act. And I just want to highlight that because it starts to divorce the idea that it's something that requires a second. Not that we don't celebrate it with a second, and that there's very, you know, something very, very beautiful about that. But it also is our natural birthright. This bliss is within us, actually. And it's ready to be sort of invoked and it's ready to be revealed in various experiences. I have women that it also happens to in yoga classes, various things when it will come. So I'm just saying, no pun intended, when it will come. So that happens. Okay, a few more minutes together. So this is some of the things that can help us to strengthen also the yoni. Strengthen, and I have to say also with the jade exercise is not just about strengthening, but it's also about opening. There's a real opening that happens. There is a strengthening, but there's also, you know, even the egg massages, like any massage tool would massage, it massages spaces where there may be knots or holding. And as I mentioned to you before, the yoni is really a mapping of our life's history. It's got all these reflexology points. Trauma, old experiences, various emotional states can be held in the yoni. So you start to do these practices, you may also notice that you get, you know, uncontrollable laughter or some crying starts to come, or there's a shifting of how the body holds itself. A lot of things can start to reveal themselves actually with this. Okay. And then lastly for today, with our self sadhana, and next week we will begin with our sensuality sadhana with another, is self-pleasuring. So self-pleasuring might be what we were thinking of right away, you know, like yoni yoga, sensuality sadhana means like my own masturbation. That's what I often hear from people. But actually, as you've seen, the sensuality sadhana can be a whole host of other things as well. And then it can also come to beautiful self-pleasuring. And really, this is again about getting acquainted with ourselves. So it's not like Tantra, you know, and there's a lot of misunderstandings that Tantra says you should do this and this and this, like as though there's some kind of scriptural rules. Actually, let me read this to you. There are very few sutras that mention about pleasure and orgasm and sexuality. It's been more of an osmotic teaching, so taught from teacher to student. So there aren't a bunch of scriptures that teach us everything that should happen in the sexual act. But there are beautiful sutras like this that say very clearly, at the moment of orgasm, the truth is illumined, the one everyone is longing for. the one everyone is longing for. What it means is God or the beloved or your very own joy or your liberation, whatever word you want to call it, your recognition of being your fullness. At the moment of orgasm, the truth is illumined, the one everyone is longing for. Or we could even say we're all longing for ourselves, to be at home in ourselves, to be at peace in ourselves, actually. And so the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra is a very powerful text with 112 meditations, and 2 of them point to orgasm or point to pleasure. And this is one of the ones that points to pleasure. So when it comes to self-pleasuring, it's not like I'm going to tell you do this and do this and do this, and you want to get here and you want to get there and you want to get here. But what Tantra and what we can call more neo-Tantra, so more Tantra that's shared in a new kind of way that especially involves sexuality, does share, is that we can have a multiplicity of orgasms. And what I mean by that is that our orgasms, this orgasm, like I explained it to you now, is not something that only needs to occur when we are stimulated by another person. Orgasm, again, is our very connection to kama, to pleasure. And orgasm, how we have thought of orgasm is very conditioned, extremely conditioned. Most of us have been conditioned into the idea of a clitoral orgasm, for example, that clitoral orgasm is the only type of orgasm. We don't, for example, think of the fact that many of us have orgasms in the moment when we're at the top of a mountain and we see a vast landscape, that also can be orgasmic. We don't think of the orgasm of the first taste of a strawberry, that this can be so beautifully pleasurable, actually. We really relegate it, or the time our child is born, for example. Ecstatic birth actually points to the fact that, yeah, there can be a lot of pain. And a lot of women say ecstatic birth, nothing. I have nothing to say about this. But what I can say is that some women will say there's also an orgasmic experiencing, that both can be there, actually. So in that, it's like a roller coaster, right? I was saying this today with an individual I was working with, that we can have all of the no as we're going up and the ultimate yes, like, oh yes, the roller coaster, oh my God, but also why did I get on this, right? So in the same way, we can have orgasms actually in the most intense moments of our lives, but we've been sexually conditioned so strongly that we also only relegate orgasm as something that happens in the sexual act with another and not as a deep pleasure of life's experiencing. And we also often as women relegate it as a clitoral experience. And orgasm comes in a multitude of ways. This is what I want to say to you. We sometimes outline it as there's 7 different types of orgasms, that we can have a clitoral orgasm. We can have an orgasm also from the entrance of the vagina. We can have an orgasm from the G-spot or the internal walls of the vagina. For those of you who aren't aware of the G-spot, it's if you take your fingers in this way, if you come to the second knuckle, and if this was your yoni and you introduce the fingers here, the G-spot's about there on the upper wall of the yoni, the upper wall of the vaginal canal. There is in this space, there is a spot that holds a lot of our femininity, that holds a lot of our emotionality, and that this spot can be highly orgasmic, very watery also in its orgasm potential. Let's say it in that way. So it can be very emotional. Emotion here and a massaging of that area can induce orgasm. So this is a 3rd type. But we can also orgasm, for example, from stimulation of the erogenous zones, like the innards of, for example, the elbows, or from our necks or our ears, or we can orgasm from our nipples. We can also, and the one that we often speak to in Tantra, is as there's a deeper unfolding, we can actually start to unravel and reveal orgasm potential and the orgasmic energy and the pleasure energy in our cervix. So in the deepest part of the yoni. And if you actually see it, it looks like a little bit like the bottom of a flower. So the cervix is like the little bud point of that which opens up towards the uterus, so it's kind of like the roots of the flower. And in that way, Tantra knows that as women start to have more pleasure there and more experience of kama, of pleasure and bliss in that area, the more we start to unfold from the inside. And I see this very often, whether this is with yourself or with self-pleasuring or through some of these practices, like I said before, through yoga, meditation, as this area starts to become more relaxed and more open to pleasure, there can be an inner kind of unfolding that happens. This is the best way I can say it. And again, when I first heard this, I had only ever really had a clitoral orgasm. Maybe I stumbled upon a G-spot orgasm once, you know, and was kind of like, what was that combination of things that happened? But mostly I had relegated orgasm to the genitals, firstly, localized, you know, in that area, to being kind of a hard shock kind of thing that would happen there. And not really the openness to recognize that orgasm is that all embodied pleasure that can go right up to the top of the head and out towards the fingers. And that orgasm can happen in various ways. It can also happen anally for all of us. You know, it can happen in through the anus. So I suppose, you know, especially in this first course, we talk about it more in the second, but I just like to open your hearts and your yonis to the understanding that what we might have thought about orgasm to this point is something to question and inquire into. And that you can start to come to self-pleasuring to really see what feels beautiful and blissful, what feels like the deepest gift, what's really in many ways waking me up to my own bliss, waking me up to my own essential pleasure, actually, and to get out of our heads that it has to happen in one way or another. And I know some of us, we may have been in long-term sexless marriages also. You know, I work with many women who have been experiencing that. So I just name that. Some of us also may be pre-orgasmic. We just don't think orgasm is something for us. Some of us may not have explored these things before. I had a beautiful woman, I think 2 or 3 courses ago. She said, until this moment, I thought the G-spot and the clitoris were the same thing. And now I'm having G-spot orgasms just because you mentioned it's a different place. You know? She was amazing. She would just tell everybody everything. She was so open about all of it. And tonight, my husband and I, we had a cervical orgasm. You know, so she was like, and he was excited, you know, about all of it. But she was like, until you said it, I just thought that's what you do. And that's where you go. And that's where it's directed. So in that way, our self-pleasuring can also be about what does it feel if I touch myself here, or if I move and undulate in this way, or if I bring pleasure to that area. That's why even at Rasa, we sell yoni wands, which they're gemstone dildos, basically, but they're yoni wands made of obsidian, which really help to access the cervix. Because after years of teaching women, I said, we also need something where we can just self-pleasure and self-explore. Again, it can feel quite daunting because it's like, I'm buying a dildo. Like, is that what I'm buying? Really, you know, like, what is this? But it's a massage tool. It can be wonderful in just our self exploration to massage the area for the first time, to let go of the taboo that this is some kind of hidden place, or that our pleasure should be hidden, or that we shouldn't, you know, sort of dull our pleasure down, play small to our pleasure, that our pleasure has anything, you know, to be demonized around. This is also amazing to me, that our cultures, maybe knowing the power of that pleasure and the amount of ojas that is liberated with it, have also confined it. Because what could be more beautiful than people in deep pleasure? I mean, you don't tell someone not to eat. You know, I saw it here when I was walking up to teach all of you tonight, a Nutella pancake. You know, people are orgasming on the side of the road, eating their Nutella pancakes, and no one's shunning or, you know, shaming them for putting that in their mouth, right? So in the same way, it's like, why are we not open to what's one of the most birthright pleasures, right? Which is this pleasure of really, of what's hidden really in the altar of our yonis. So in that way, I would really suggest to all of you in this upcoming week to create a sacred space, to practice with some of these sensuality sadhanas, to maybe even do the 5 sense awakening with yourself, and then to have a goalless self-exploration. You're not trying to get an orgasm. You're not trying to go somewhere. You're not trying to, you know, get pleasure. You're just there with yourself, breathing, feeling, touching, exploring, looking if you feel to. I had one woman, so beautiful, young woman, who had been raped. And I'm aware that many of us maybe on this call also have experienced that trauma in our lives. And she said she never wanted to look at her yoni. Even when lovemaking, she would always make sure she was in a way she could never, you know, she would never look. And she had so much shame. And after this talk, she started to look and pleasure. And about a month later, she wrote me and she said, Tiffany, I'm in love with my yoni. Like, I'm in love with the beauty of what she offers me, and all that, you know, the power of being a woman and what she holds and the beauty of her. And she said, and she's become like a beautiful pink flower. What happened? She's changed shape and she looks different. And she said she's, she's gotten much more delicate. And so in this way, that was a beautiful example. And this woman, her language her first language is not English. And in her sharing, it was so poetic, I have to say, and direct, the way she was sharing in that way, no filter. And this is this kind of goalless self-exploration, to just be there with it, almost like you're acquainting yourself for the first time with what it is to be alive and to have a yoni and to be there with it. And then to see what happens with orgasms, to be open to the possibility that orgasm can be multiple also. Like when we are with another or ourselves, we can have multiple rolling orgasms. It can be fully embodied. It's not just localized in our genitals. With breath also, we can draw it into all spaces of the body. We can orgasm from the heart. That we start to notice also the way in which orgasm can be experienced, not just from the clitoris, but actually more internal. A clitoral orgasm is more like a man's ejaculation. It's similar to a penile tissue. It's more external. And to be very honest with all of you, it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a tip. So it has its own place. It releases stress. It also has, a release of emotionality, but the deeper orgasms into the vaginal canal and up towards the cervix are very revealing. They're basically thought of as the most enlightening, that a cervical orgasm can bring that light from the inside. And what it also does is it implodes energy rather than explodes. For a lot of women after a clitoral orgasm, we feel a bit spent, tired. But after deeper orgasms, you feel like you have renewed energy, more calm, serene, renewed. And a lot of women will feel like, oh, okay, like I have even more energy because the energy has gone inward rather than outward. So there's a lot, that can be explored here, basically, is what I'm sharing with you around this. Okay, integrations for this upcoming week. We will quickly touch on this when we come to next week, but integrations. Daily, a 5 sense awakening meditation. So even just sitting and being aware of the 5 gateways. What do I smell, hear, see? What am I touched by right now? To start becoming more aware of our constant relationship through the 5 senses. This is one of the most powerful ways that we become sensually alive. And then self-pleasuring explorations in your own time, in your own pace, women. I'm aware that each one of us will come in our own time, in our own way. It may look like, the massage we were doing to our breasts already, continuing with that, whatever feels like a safe and comfortable zone for you. And then breath, dance, and movement. So the breath we talked about, working with the breath, dancing and moving. I just really suggest to all of you this week, get a few days where you put on some music and you move through those 2 spaces and you just enjoy yourself. You enjoy your breath, you enjoy your dance, you enjoy that movement, and see what that brings for you. So this is for today. Questions, comments, things that are there for any of you.
I have a question, Tiffany.
Yes, and then I'm just seeing Donna said, I find it easier to do if in tabletop or standing, hands on thighs. To do the eggs with the egg.
No, the Mula Bandha.
The Mula Bandha, yeah, that's great. So being in tabletop or standing with hands on thighs, I like that also, absolutely. Yeah, especially when there's a stacking of the body, it can help, but also when it's relaxed. So as Donna's saying, like if you're in a tabletop position, you're more relaxed in through that area. So that can help you to, really relax the other 2 areas and bring some attention to the space of Mula Bandha. I love that. Thank you, Donna, especially with your Pilates and all your background and working in that area. And Lisa?
Yes. So my question, Tiffany, you were talking about the orgasms, and I do come from a trauma background, and it took me a long time. I was probably in my mid-30s before I ever even had an orgasm self, and I've never had one with a partner. So my question is, they are for me right now as I self-pleasure, a lot of them are of the clitoris, like that kind of expansion. Would you say that just doing some of these, how do you bring that inside? Does it just kind of happen? Or how, I'm not really understanding how the practices might shift that.
Yes, absolutely. So what you can do is just by bringing attention and not having the goal of just, I'm going to have a clitoral orgasm, and you just keep going with the pleasure. We'll speak more about this in the second level also, but a lot of us are just chasing pleasure, right? So we're chasing the climax. So you might feel the pleasure that arises from there, but then you might also at the same time bring some self-pleasuring to that inner area, for example, of the G spot. Like bring your fingers there or use something. I'm being very open with all of you because I want you to learn these things also. So bringing your fingers there, and it's beautiful. There's nothing taboo, you know, this is what's amazing to me. So seeing what that feels like also, Lisa. So it's almost like we have this pleasure cycle, or this pleasure movement, we can say, in which we start to move to what we could call the point of no return, which once we get there, we're going to climax. Even if we moved our hand, or we stopped doing, or we stopped making love with someone, we would climax, you know? So it's almost like we get there. So what we do is we tease that edge a little bit. We might bring some pleasure to that area, which we're comfortable with or we're used to more. So that might be the clitoris. But at the same time, we might do breast massage. Or then we might bring some stimulation to the deeper areas of the yoni and bring breath there as well. Be breathing there and bring our attention there. You know, it really is, again, about the attention and the breath, and not being goal driven to, I know this is where I get pleasure from, let me go there. It's more about that open exploration. And a lot of women, just me saying this and you just starting to explore, they're like, oh, that's really pleasurable also. Because we've been told, like, go for it. The clitoris is the place. And it is one of the easiest. But it's also, we have been, the primary sexual organ is our brains, right? It's our minds. That's what turns us on. That's what, you know, that's the primary sexual organ. So now that that primary sexual organ knows that you can be centralized in various ways, now you can follow that with the action of, oh, okay, what are some of the other ways that I might also experience pleasure? I'll tell you very openly with all of you, because this course is really about sharing all of these things, being together in sisterhood. I was always literally too uptight to ever think that I could have any pleasure from the area of the anus. And I remember the first partner who touched me there, I was like, that's gross. And, you know, we can't do, and like, I'm a proper Canadian girl. You know, like that can't happen. And then after softening into, he was intuitive. After softening into it, I realized, oh, there is something there. I'm uptight, literally. I'm uptight. There's something there that also has some pleasure. I didn't want to necessarily have anal sex, not that some of you might not experience, also enjoy that and experience that. But I also was able to see that there was a blending of things. And that too was something that there was a lot of taboo around, and a lot of mental kind of clingings and cringings and various things. So even letting go and just letting ourselves be in that exploration, that whole field can hold pleasure, and it can also hold trauma and blockages and confinements. You know, when your sexual energy starts to free itself, your mind completely and totally goes through an overhaul. It changes us from the inside out. It literally starts to change. I see women's jaws shift, like literally, it's like their whole jaw shifts. I've seen women's breasts enlarge. It's like they get this feminine energy, these hormones moving, and then all of a sudden they're like, what the, like, my breasts just got bigger. My husband's saying they got bigger. Did they get bigger? Everywhere else didn't gain weight, but somehow my breasts got bigger. More collagen in the body. They start to notice that the face, you know, becomes more youthful, or glow, tejas, as we call it, starts to move through. So in that way, Lisa, it's a great question, because it's, again, not like, how do I do this and I've got to get it right? But it's more about, how can I be open to the fact that there may be places and ways that I haven't allowed myself to connect to my own pleasuring. Does that help at all when I say
Very,
that?
very much. And I just have a follow-up question to that. Do you suggest, when I'm starting, so I have the yoni eggs, I got them 2 years ago, and I tried them once and went, nope. So I'm gonna try them again. Do we combine some of this? Like if I do a yoni practice, like with the yoni eggs, would I also try the yoni massage? Is that, or is it just one? Because is it step by step? What? Or
So,
I know it's intuitive as well, but I'm just wondering, is there a...
yes, we've given, like, you have a lot of different tools and things here. And basically, because again, each one of you has your own constitution and your own way you're going to come to this, right? In your own unique practice. But you can absolutely have your own sacred space and ritual where you also put the egg in. You have the 5 sense meditation as well. And then maybe you're also pleasuring as well. It can be very helpful. For many women, the egg, as you're pleasuring and there might be some contraction, it can draw up to touch the cervix. So for some women, that can also help that it touches that area. And so the fact that you're feeling that, absolutely. What I wouldn't suggest is that all of you are like, okay, I'm going to do the breathing. I'm going to do self-pleasuring. I'm also going to do, PC pull-ups. Like, just explore each area as well. I love the question, Lisa.
Thanks.
But use your egg, dear one. Use your egg. A beautiful egg. Any last questions, women? Okay, so we'll meet together again next Monday and we'll have 2 more classes together, okay? So that we really make sure that we have the spaciousness to touch on things. Let's just conclude with a moment of resting for a second. Let's come to close the eyes and just bring our attention down into that space of the yoni, but also simultaneously the heart, hridayam, the heart space. And just being with deep and full breaths in these areas. And for a moment, just asking that whatever is to enter in and bring change to our lives at these spaces, will do so. May it be so, may it be so, may it be so. May it bring deep health, deep wholeness, and profound joy for each and every one. Namaste. Thank you, women. Thank you for sharing another beautiful evening together, and we'll see each other next Monday, okay? Take care, all. Good night. You can come off mute and say good night to each other.
Good night,
Good
everybody.
night, everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Night.
Good night, loves.